everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of the Superhero Rewind Commentary Project. It's me, Captain Logan, and I'm going to be doing solo commentaries now for as close to as I can manage every superhero movie ever made. And I know 14 years ago I said I was going to do a scripted review of every superhero movie ever made, and I got through 200 in the scripted format, and I did another 30 or so, I think. I haven't actually counted exactly how many I did, but I did about another 30 in the unscripted format, and I've decided now to sort of pseudo start over, and I thought it would be wonderful to have a consistent format and for us to have a solo commentary from me focusing as much on story and character as possible, but we'll talk about other ins and outs of the movies as well, for every movie that I can get away with doing in commentary form. And I'm going to do this every Monday night that I'm able to, and we're going to get into it very, very quickly here. I don't want to do a whole lot of preamble, but I just want to say welcome, whether you have been watching for a real long time or whether this is a good jumping on point for you, being a number one of sorts. I'm going to try to keep up with the Spotify podcast feed, and so if you're watching over there, really appreciate you, or listening over there, I should say, really appreciate you doing that as well. So these will be commentaries, and that means I'll be watching the movie as I'm discussing it. I'll be interacting with a live audience. I'll give you the opportunity every week on YouTube to give me questions and ideas for things that you'd like me to talk about, and I got a healthy number of those for this movie. I really appreciate everybody who put in questions for that, and you can also interact with me live if you choose to come on Monday night at 8 Central. And quick plug for Patreon, you can also become a Patreon producer at the $10 tier, and that gets you access to our Discord. I'll read your name at the end of every Superhero Rewind commentary, and you'll be able to help me pick things for review. You can also do that at that part of it at the $5 tier, and we meet once a month with that group, and I think we'll be doing that next week. So once again, thanks a lot for being here, whether you're watching this, whether you're listening to this. I mean, I hope if you're watching it, you're also listening. It would be a strange thing to look at with the sound off. And thanks for doing it live, or if you're doing it after the fact. Tonight, we're going to do Batman from 1989, and I have done 12 different commentaries on this movie in the past. We'll see if I can come up with anything I haven't talked about before, but this will be the most substantial commentary I've done on this movie in a long time, because I'm not going to be too horribly concerned with whether I've discussed certain aspects or mentioned certain things before, since this is the start of this, and I want to keep these as interesting and, again, story-focused as I can, so I'll have to repeat some things I've said in the past, but these will be kind of updated discussions on these. And by the way, I'm also going to do my level best to make this as listenable as possible, whether you're watching the movie or not. So I'll try to give you some context with the scenes as we're looking at them, but if you choose not to watch the movie along with us, you should be able to follow it okay. I'm going to do my level best. This is one of the first times I've done a commentary, at least on a movie like this, all by myself, so everybody bear with me. I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to keep these, like I said, as consistent as possible, but I'm sure the show will evolve a little bit as we go along. Hopefully, I'll get better at it as we go, doing this all on my own, and I hope everybody is ready to get started. I've got a timer there on the screen, so if you lose your place or you have any technical issues, or if you come in late, you should be able to line up with me with your disc streaming, however you want to watch this. In this moment in time, I believe HBO Max still has Batman 89, and you of course can watch it DVD, Blu-ray, however you want to. I'm going to be looking at it with the Blu-ray, which I got not too long ago. I was watching this on DVD for the longest time, but I think my good buddy Connor Nielsen gave me his old Blu-ray set, and I am after every physical version of this movie eventually I want to get every release on DVD, Blu-ray, what have you. Anyway, enough preamble from me. Let's go ahead and get right into the movie. Make sure you're at timestamp 0 past all the menus if you're watching it on disc, and past any logos and things that weren't there in the original theatrical version. We're not going to watch the commercials ahead of time this time, as much as I love doing that, but make sure if you have your Warner Brothers ball cap, you're wearing your Warner Brothers ball cap, and if you have your Diet Coke, make sure you're drinking some Diet Coke. Actually, don't do that. It's not real good for you. Let's go ahead and get right into it, folks. Everybody, please press play right now. So I've talked about this movie a lot. This is the reason that I get into superheroes and superhero movies in the first place, as I've discussed in lots and lots of videos. And if it weren't for this, I would not be the giant Batman fan I am. I certainly wouldn't have the YouTube channel talking about what I tend to talk about. I never would have done Superhero Rewind, all of that. So this remains near and dear to me. And I'm discovering more and more that I don't think I'm capable of getting tired of watching Batman. I did an experiment once where we did a commentary on this movie every day for a week, and I cheated on that a little bit. We skipped some days, but I mean, it was a lot of commentaries all in a row, and we've joked for a long time, could I watch one of these or this movie every day for a year and not get sick of it? I kind of think I could. And what I was attempting with preparing for this commentary is getting my head back in a narrative place with this, because this is a movie that has always washed over me, that I have, for various reasons, a difficult time thinking about critically, and even thinking about on any kind of story level, or much of a story level, beyond just real clear superficial stuff, because it's been with me forever. Like I said, grew up on this, and I have, my biases with it, and it's always felt almost review-proof in a way to me, just because I have too much nostalgia for it, and because it's not really about what it's saying, what it's about, so much as creating a feeling, an atmosphere. And generally, it fits into the standard formula for a superhero comic book adventure, and it really degenerates into all of that by the end, thanks to Warren Scarron, whose credit for partial screenplay is on the screen there. This is initially written by Sam Hamm, but his first draft script, which I love and will reference a number of times, I'm sure, through this, I skimmed it again for this commentary. He tells a much more character-driven story than the one we end up getting here, and Scarron, in my view, kind of makes it feel as if Superman was directed by Richard Donner for the first 2 acts, and then Richard Lester comes in and directs it for the 3rd act. That's really what this feels like. And that's not a perfect analogy, because there's plenty of stuff in the first 2 acts that don't make a great deal of sense either, and where it could be certainly a great deal more character-driven. We are very walled off from our protagonist here. That is fully intentional on Tim Burton's part, but I don't know how necessary that was to get his point across. And he kind of had this contention with Sam Hamm, at least creatively. I don't mean that those 2 guys didn't get along, but just in the pieces we have it, where one guy is approaching it much more as a traditional narrative. Heightened, yes. Very comic book, yes. But traditional storytelling, beginning, middle to end. Your protagonist has a real character arc, and everybody is very drawn, and I understand them, and they're pretty three-dimensional, the majority of them, particularly with Vicki Vale, and even Bruce Wayne himself, who in Hamm's script might be a bit more walled off from the audience than, say, Christian Bale's Batman, or even Pattinson's Batman. But But characters like Vicki Vale and Knox, who I adore in that script, and it is, dare I say, a fantastic love triangle in that version of it. And yes, movies change constantly from script to screen, but it would have been nice if we could have gotten something closer to what was there in my mind. However, that script does not ruin this movie for me, and I've always been kind of afraid to go back to it because I always worry that as much as I love that story, I'm going to get to a place where I'm finally going to go, you know what? Burton's Batman is nonsense. I can't even watch this movie anymore. I want it to be Ham's so bad. What Burton brings to it is style and atmosphere and panache and the timelessness that was not there in that original script. That script, in fact, is set in a particular year, and we're told precisely when Bruce Wayne's parents die in 1964, I think, and that's something that I really appreciate about what Burton brought to it. The kind of literalization, I should say, if that's a word, that Burton brings to the duality to Batman and Bruce Wayne as almost a fractured psyche, almost like he has multiple personalities, is really interesting and is not really in Sam Hamm's script. That's a much more traditional sort of Miller or Moore Batman in... Not that those two guys are doing exactly the same thing, but more lucid Batmen, certainly in the mid-'80s, and it's certainly more like that kind of thing. So I haven't really talked about any of what we're seeing if you're watching the movie with me, but up to this point, we have more or less what is in Hamm's script, and it doesn't start to change too much until the second act, really, but I'll point out some places where it's different, particularly with Vicki Vale and Alexander Knox's relationship. One thing that, and I'll read some questions here after a bit, but one of our viewers suggested that Batman is not... And pardon me for repeating myself because I'll read this in a bit, but somebody suggested that Batman is much more interested in his own personal vendetta and revenge than he is in being a hero, than saving anyone. And I think there's some truth to that, although I think that viewer is ignoring a few things here and there to make that point, and I'll get into that a bit later. But I wanted to bring it up here because one of the things that viewer suggested is for evidence is that Batman just stands there on that roof and watches these muggers rip off somebody. And he doesn't step in to do anything. He comes like a wraith in the night and he attacks them after the fact. And that's a good point. I never really considered that angle on it. I always thought the idea was that he just got there a little too late. You know, he looks down and this is happening. And he's like, oh, I don't have enough time to drop down, so I'll just tackle them after the fact. Everybody loves Billy D. Williams as Harvey Dent, and the idea was on Hamm's part and also on Burton's part, if he's to be believed in his commentary, that if more movies had been made, Harvey Dent would have become Two-Face. And I think this was Hamm's idea before it was the studios or Burton's or anybody. And in fact, I believe that script is written before Tim Burton is attached to the project. I don't know if I'm right about that for sure, but that is dated 1986. I don't think Burton comes on the project that early. And I'm not saying that Burton takes credit for it, but he does talk about it like it's this great idea with the way he interprets Batman. That Bruce Wayne has a, again, fractured psyche. He's kind of two guys simultaneously trying to make those two personas make sense with each other, and having Harvey Dent there, if you know your stuff anyway, even in 1989, really kind of pushes that idea to the fore. You'd be thinking that about more of the duality and that kind of thing. And more importantly, if you made a sequel with Dent, with Billy D. Williams, you could take those ideas to the nines, where you could see a dark mirror for Batman in a very different way than you do with the Joker, where you see that guy who cannot reconcile those two parts of his psyche, and that sort of inability to make decisions go to its absolute furthest extent, because we do have a Bruce Wayne that has that problem, and it's a thing that over the years I've come to understand and appreciate more and more, because I always thought Bruce Wayne was really odd and confusing and just saying things, and again, it's this literal thing that's being done, particularly on Burton's part, to make Bruce Wayne two guys, to the point where sometimes he's not even sure which one he is. We're about to meet Eckhart here, and Eckhart reminds everybody, of course, of Harvey Bullock, and originally Bullock is, if memory serves, much more of a dirty cop, and Eckhart certainly could have just been Bullock. I guess considering that I like the gruff but good-natured version of that character, I'm maybe ultimately glad that that didn't happen, and we do indeed get a Bullock in Sam Hamm's comics when he does the 6-issue Batman miniseries based on this continuity that came out a couple of years ago, and it's a little weird to have. It's not as weird as drinking Drano, but it's a little bit weird to have that and Eckhart in the same continuity. There are some things about Jack Napier that are much more understandable and come out to the fore in the initial script that I don't think translates great to the movie, and I don't think it's because it's changed so much as just, as often happens from the page to the screen, so much is cut that he starts to look a bit more one-dimensional, and I don't really understand what he's after. There are a couple of lines that make it clear if you're really paying attention, but I think should probably be brought more to the forefront and made more explicit. I don't mean I need everything force-fed to me in a story, of course, but you do want to understand your character's motivations, and Jack Napier's whole thing is he doesn't like being the lowly underling. He thinks he is a straight-up narcissist. He's a megalomaniac, and he wants to run crime in Gotham City. And this is not a thing I fully appreciated until I read Sam Hamm's script. Yes, in this scene, Eckhart is going to say, I have a difficult time watching this and not just quoting it, so I'm going to try really hard not to do that. But why don't you broadcast it? Anyway, when Eckhart pops in, he says, you mean when you run the show, you ain't got no future, Jack. And that is expounded upon a bit more in Sam Hamm's script, both in the scene, but also in the playing card motif that is not really there so much in this version of the movie. There's a lot of stuff in Sam Hamm's script that kind of feel like table scraps left over that are in the film and make it perplexing and bewildering, but also create a mystery and add to the atmosphere. So there's a part of me that would like all that fleshed out, but I would kind of more like to go to, and this is probably my nostalgia talking, I kind of don't want the print that we have monkeyed with too much. So I would love just a completely different version of this in a different universe where this actually got made more the way I would have loved after I became an adult and read a better story, because Sam Hamm's script is, I think, absolutely a better story. But as far as table scraps go, I was always confused by the playing card motif, where you have, don't forget your lucky deck. And I'm like, why is Jack Napier so into playing cards? What is that whole thing? And it's admittedly maybe a little bit too spelled out actually in Hamm's script, but the idea is supposed to be that he sees himself as a jack, and what he really wants to be is an ace. But then when tragedy strikes with Batman, he becomes a Joker. That's the whole idea. And those are all represented by playing cards and then by the chemical plant. So you have the Jack, and I don't know if I'm reading this right, because I'm not reading Vicky's legs. That's Knox's job. I don't know if I'm remembering this right. We'll look at it when we get to that scene. But is it the Jack that actually has the hole in it, or is it a Joker? I'm forgetting now, but I'll look for it when we get there, because we haven't had that scene yet. when we get to Grissom. But anyway, the idea is his name is Jack. He is a Jack. That means that he's the right-hand man, but he's not the boss, and the right-hand man is expendable. And the ace is represented by the chemical plant in Sam Hamm's script, because like in the comics, it's called Ace Chemicals, and I don't know why it's changed to Axis Chemicals, but I wish that was left in the movie, because it's a really good motif. It's a real good metaphor. And then, so Axis Chemicals becomes, it still plays okay. It still kind of works, but I wish it was still called Ace, because that makes it Grissom's ace in the hole for getting rid of Jack Napier. And then that doesn't actually work out the way he wants, of course, because Batman is going to accidentally drop him in a vat of acid and turn him into the Joker, and now he's the wild card character. And so he's given everything he ever wanted. He gets to take over the gang, and he gets to try to make Gotham in his own image. And again, this is much clearer in Hamm's script. I think it's still more or less the same thing in the movie, but he seems to just be kind of going around doing things, and his not just motivation, but, you know, once he's the Joker, you expect him to be chaotic, you expect him to be about anarchy, and he is those things, but I always heard the complaint from a lot of people that the Joker is too much like Jack Napier in the first place. That Jack Napier is, oh no, it is a Joker that has the bullet hole in it, which makes it foreshadowing. But anyway, so the idea is that Napier, or the idea that people always complained about, is that Napier is psychotic in the first place. But I think that's the whole point, is that Jack is, and I understand not liking this as well as a Joker that doesn't have an origin, certainly, and I agree, and I also am in the camp that doesn't like Batman, or pardon me, Bruce Wayne's parents being killed by the Joker, because that's just kind of unnecessary poetry, and the movie doesn't need it. It's better in, again, the Hamm script where you have Robin at the end. I don't think Robin had to be in this movie, but in that version, it's Batman Forever, where the Joker, instead of Two-Face, kills Robin's family, and it's basically the same thing you have here, but it's Robin instead of Batman, and I think that certainly works a lot better. But, and there's the lucky deck, which again plays a great deal better in the initial script than it does in the movie. But I really like the idea that, because this parallels Batman pretty well, that Jack is, or that the Joker is Jack without any inhibitions. And so when he falls in the vat of acid, he takes his mask off, and the Joker is actually what Jack Napier always was, but uninhibited. It's almost like when Stanley Ipkiss puts the mask on in The Mask, or I guess I should say more Dorian, the bad guy in that movie, because he's horrifying when he takes his mask off or puts it on, however you want to look at it, and this is the real man exaggerated and taken to his fullest extent. And that is traditionally, arguably, what happens with Batman, where when, not that it's kind of the inverse. He's not horrifying, he's using the terror to do good things in the world. But the idea, again, traditionally, is Batman is the real guy created by the death of his parents, and the bat suit is who he really is. That's what Sam Hamm scripted with it. In the movie, everything with the Joker is more or less that, even though what he's planning on doing in places, particularly with Vicki Vale, is very confusing, and I'll talk about that later when we get to it with the Flugelheim. But with Batman, you've got much more of a 50-50 split, where he is, again, he's basically got DID, or some sort of variation of that. It's not as extreme, right? Where, so here in, let me say this real quick, in Wayne Manor at the party, Vicki Vale asks which one of these guys is Bruce Wayne, and he says, well, I'm not sure. And in previous commentaries and reviews, I've always complained about that moment. It's very odd that he seems so suspicious of her to the point where he doesn't even want to say who he is. And maybe that's not the right read. It is possible that what's going on is that Burton is not telling a story in the traditional sense so much as it's part of kind of the fairy tale and just bringing out the themes and ideas. And so everything that characters say has subtext that's not so much about what the character is doing as what's being said about the character, if that makes sense. And so is that in that scene Bruce saying, I'm not sure, in that I don't know if I'm Bruce or if I'm Batman. And that's an idea that Makura, on one of our viewers on YouTube, brought up. And so I want to go ahead and read his comment now that we're there. He says, this version of Bruce has one of the most extreme versions of the separation of the Wayne Batman personas, as I was talking about earlier. He can't say the words I'm Batman in Vicky's apartment aloud since he is not in the suit and it feels too wrong to say it out of costume. Now, I think that might be reaching a little bit. I always thought that he was just finding it difficult to say that to her. But all of these things stacked on top of each other, it gets more compelling. He says it's the closest to a straight split personality. He claims he's Bruce Wayne most of the time. Remember when Joker says Nestpaw later in Vicky's apartment, that's a good call, and has trouble identifying himself as Bruce when he is first asked by Vicky, as we just saw. Maybe this is due to his attraction to Vicky. He slips back mentally to the Bat side, since that side may have more of the male id impulses. And I'm going to stop the comment there. This is pretty lengthy. I'll get back to it and say that is really interesting and gets me thinking about the id, ego, superego of it. And I may be stretching a bit when I say this, but I'd never had this thought before. I'm going to build on his idea and say, if, go to the Freud of it. If Batman is the id, I think you could make the argument that Bruce is the ego, and where is the superego? But I would in fact say that Bruce himself is the superego. The superego, as I understand it, being, because it's been a while since I studied the psychology, but the superego being the conscience, and the ego being the kind of the mediator between hand and heart, to put it in Metropolis terms. The brain of the operation. It controls those two sides. I think that the struggle with Batman, maybe in this movie anyway, is that Bruce Wayne is actually the superego, and what he's missing is the ego. He's got two parts that are very difficult to control that kind of run off with each other. He's got this super heightened conscience in Bruce Wayne. Notice that he is the philanthropist Bruce Wayne. He's not really the playboy. He is in Sam Hamm's script, but he's not in the movie. He is constantly doing charitable events. In Sam Hamm's script, it's actually, interestingly, what it is in The Dark Knight, where this party is a benefit for Harvey Dent, who is running for DA but hasn't gotten it yet. And here, or it's sort of like with The Dark Knight. I realize he is already the DA there too, but he throws Harvey a fundraiser. And here Harvey Dent, I'm not sure why this choice was made, but he is already the DA, not running for DA. And quick aside, I don't like that as well, because there's much more of a sense of the corruption in Gotham going on in Sam Hamm's script. Here, you've got one corrupt cop, very stereotypical. He's got that standard archetype in Eckhart. Everybody else is above board. Where are all the corrupt cops and politicians? They're nowhere. Apparently we have all this horrible rampant corruption, and you're only seeing it in the gang lords, in Grissom and his men. And so I'm thinking, okay, so you just have a really ineffectual police department, and it makes you laugh at them when they're not doing their jobs properly, like when Joker is on the steps of City Hall and murders one of the gangsters and the cops are all there. They just stand there. Is it because they don't know what they're doing and they're ineffectual and they're scared, or is it because they're on the take or something? I don't know. You don't know. It's not in the movie. I have no idea. But what I was going to suggest with the psychology is that if you might have this very extreme split, not exactly where a whole personality takes over, but almost like the two Kirks, not physically separated apart, of course, but like the two Kirks in The Enemy Within in Star Trek the original series, where one of them has all of the good parts of Kirk and one of them has all the bad parts of Kirk, and they need each other. They're ineffectual. And that's kind of what you have here in a way. Perhaps then the ego is Alfred. Not his conscience. That's Bruce Wayne. He's already got that, but it's a conscience that's uncontrolled. He needs direction. He needs logic. He needs sense. And that's kind of the role that Alfred plays for him. And I do like Alfred in the movie a lot more than in Sam Hamm's script. He is the voice of reason. He is constantly trying to bring Bruce back down to earth and trying to help him live a real life and do more than just go out and punch bad guys. And a lot of that is missing in Sam Hamm's script, which I was kind of surprised by going back to it again. So once again, Axis chemicals changed to Ace chemicals for no reason I fully understand. For a long time, I didn't totally get the whole point of going to the plant and everything. I couldn't tell if it was a break-in or if this was one of the front companies. The front company thing is talked about here. I think it's, again, a little bit more clear in Sam Hamm's script. It's a little bit more fleshed out there. But the idea is supposed to be, just going back and looking at this closer again, that somehow Grissom has figured out that Jack is sleeping with his girlfriend. I don't know, and she has a little bit more of a presence in the original script, by the way. I don't know how he knows that, and actually no version of this gives you that. That's kind of the occasion for story, right? Is that Grissom has figured out that Jack is sleeping with his girlfriend, and so now that he's given this opportunity where the DA is going after the chemical plant, which, even though Harvey Dent isn't the DA yet, that is in the original script as well. Now he's got an opportunity to go try to set up a lot of Jacks, Jack Nicholson, Jack Palance, Jack Napier, to try to get Jack killed. And just, it takes a few viewings for some of these things for all of that to be real clear. I think Jack Napier needs more screen time before he becomes the Joker. And I've always felt this just kind of in my bones watching this, where it's like, there are, I don't mean connective tissue scenes missing so much plot-wise, but if the Joker is supposed to be an exaggerated version of him, I just need to live with him a little bit longer. We get all this information retroactively about how gifted he is in various departments and what his aptitudes are, as his psychological profile says, with science and chemistry, which is interesting that those two things are separate in the list, because chemistry is a science, and art. And you sort of can get a little bit of the art side, I guess, just in superficially maybe his apartment, but maybe his girlfriend decorated all of that. I mean, I realize that he's sleeping with the boss's girl, but she seems to live there for some part of the time, or is there quite a bit. Or maybe Jack is just so enamored with her that he's got pictures of her everywhere, and none of that was her idea. I don't know. But you don't really get much of the art idea. You don't get the chemistry idea at all. He goes, I don't want to go to the chemical plant. I don't like the fumes in that place. And yes, he could say that even if he was good at chemistry and had an aptitude for it. But you don't get any sense whatsoever that he knows about chemistry or chemicals or the periodic table or anything. There's no reason to suspect that he would be able to do what he does in creating Smilex later, which is all him. He comes up with that. He doesn't hire somebody to do it. He's got a real cartoony looking scientist guy who's putting it together for him, but I'm pretty sure he came up with the formula. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and read the rest of this comment, and then maybe I'll get to some of the live comments as we go here, because I'm already somehow almost half an hour into this commentary. Let me say real quick, too, sorry, before I do that, think about the future is a motif that is provocative, like so many things in this movie where I want it to mean something, but I can't decide what exactly it's about until I read, again, the original script, and apologies for talking so much about that, but that's going to keep coming up, and just watching this on repeat over and over and over again, where I realize, oh, what Jack Napier wants, he's looking to the future, he wants to basically rule the world, he wants to run Gotham, because he thinks he is better than everyone. When he says he wants his face on the $1 bill, probably a thought he had even before he became the Joker. And so he is... Pardon me, I lost my train of thought. Let me go ahead and read the rest of this comment here. Oh, I'm sorry, I was talking about the future. It's interesting that Prince has a song called The Future. I've seen the future and it will be. I've seen the future and it works. And I don't know how much of that album he's looking at the script or the movie, or if some of those things were kind of a happy accident. But the movie opens, it seems intentionally, with the future idea in that song. What is the future of Gotham City going to look like? Which of these guys is going to win out? And the world is going to revolve around one of them, and which one is it going to be? These are both... This is a, again, very heightened and exaggerated world that is going to revolve itself around a perversion of an idea, one way or the other. Batman, even though he is the good guy, and it can be argued whether he's an anti-hero or a hero here, because Tim Burton seems very confused on that point. He wants to make him an anti-hero, but he's working with material where he's initially a straight-up hero, and sometimes he's that, and sometimes he's an anti-hero. And by the end of the movie, he's absolutely just an anti-hero, but the movie ends almost as if he's just a heroic character, and everybody applauds him for dropping a psychopath off a roof, and of course, naturally, we're all going to applaud that person and let him work with the cops. Very strange. But the initial idea with Sam Hamm's script is that he is a tortured soul, yes, but he's not a crazy person. It's the antithesis to what we get here. Tim Burton wants to make a movie because he relates to this, and that's not a knock against Tim Burton. He said that. He relates to a guy who is a little bit unhinged and a little neurotic, and is so focused on one thing, he says this in his commentary, that everything else kind of falls away and falters, and he can't focus on anything else. And he, just like the Joker, is an extreme personality that is kind of messed up in the head. He's got his heart in the right place, maybe, arguably, but he is not deranged, but a broken person. And in Sam Hamm's script, the idea we get this spelled out in the third act is that no, in fact, Bruce is not a crazy person. He has a real argument for Batman and for using his wealth in the way he's using it, and that just throwing money at things is not the answer, that he actually has to get his hands dirty. And that, of course, is nowhere in the movie. So what we have here is these wild, extreme archetypes. And I started to make this point a minute ago. The idea that Batman is this perversion of... Because there's this idea that is a lot more fleshed out in the original draft than here about commercialism and materialism. And it's in the background here, but it's not really about those things. But I think you can extrapolate, maybe I'm taking this a little too far, but I think you can extrapolate this idea that the Joker and Batman are both these weird kind of perversions of commercialism and materialism, and both of them about what we do with branding and logos. So the Joker is, or pardon me, so Batman is taking branding and logos and using that to scare criminals. And he's not selling anything except justice or his brand of it, or maybe vengeance, depending on how you want to look at it. But he's going up against corruption that is preying on people who are buying things. And the Joker is, in the opposite, a perversion of the same thing, in that he's also not traditionally selling anything. Remember, you bought it already, but he is in fact using his branding to manipulate people in an extreme way, in a perverse way even, to what Batman is fighting against, I guess, at least ideal-wise, and is killing people with his branding. And the other thing that these guys are kind of perversions of is, or at least flips of light and dark. So the Joker is a horrible person that puts light, bright hopefulness on his face and perverts that. And Batman does the opposite. He's trying to do good, at least as far as he understands and appreciates it, but he puts darkness in, but he puts it in a package of darkness and fear and scariness. This scene is more or less exactly as it is in Sam Hamm's script, where the Joker is first not quite revealed, but is getting his plastic surgery, and is, by the way, maybe the scene, one of the, if not the main scenes that stuck with me when I was a kid. You see what I have to work with here, because what he has to work with is absolutely horrifying. I'm going to get back to this comment now. He says, I also think it's worth discussing how Bruce can only perform normal social situations. He has the table set across from each other because he knows that people on dates sit across from each other, but he lacks the social awareness to pick up on the logistical problems of the length of the table. Now, I really like that, but I don't know if we can read that far into it, because I don't know if Alfred set that up or if Bruce set that up. I always assumed, because Alfred is his butler and he does everything for him, I always assumed that Alfred did that, and he was just kind of messing with Bruce. But I don't know why he would do that, considering that he is so helpful later in trying to help Bruce make this relationship work out with Vicki Vale, that he's so encouraging about it. And then he says, it is similar to Travis Bickle and Taxi Driver, understanding that couples go on dates at the movies, but doesn't realize a porn film would be inappropriate. Batman in this film is portrayed early on less as a superhero and more as a supernatural avenger, which I alluded to earlier. He doesn't prevent the first mugging in the film, but rather is the crook's karmic consequences for doing wrong, almost like a sort of angel of death figure. Any justice feels like a secondary factor for Batman. This is also like Travis Bickle, as the violence they inflict is seemingly to satisfy their own need to release their anger, and both films end with the character being unquestionably celebrated by the American public at large. Now, that part of it is really interesting, because I've never watched all of Taxi Driver. It's funny you're bringing that up since we're dealing with the Joker, but I think there is some truth in what you're saying, but I also think the movie is confused on that point at best, because Batman does actually help people. He cracks the Joker's code with the chemicals, and maybe that's just in his mind. You know, he's got to save the city in order to keep doing what he's doing, and that's not really about anybody but himself still. But it feels like, again, in certain places, the movie is, especially because he is a philanthropist when he's not Batman, it does seem like the movie very often wants to portray him as the straight-up good guy, even though he is a flawed person and you can question the way he's going about things. And then there's a light switch place where once he figures out that the Joker killed his parents, it's just revenge. He just wants to murder the Joker after that. And the movie is kind of with him. So you're right about that at the end when you say he's unquestionably celebrated by the public. And I think that's maybe the movie's biggest misstep. Even if it was supposed to just be melodrama, and it is described as such in Bruce Timm's commentary, he talks about it that way. Even if it's just to be supposed to be a fairy tale, even if it's just supposed to be melodrama, when you get to the end of a thing like that, if it's a cautionary tale or if it's a morality play, you would think that you'd know what it's getting at by the end, what the moral of the story is supposed to be, and it doesn't seem to gel with what we have at the beginning. It really seems to just be Batman is labeled the good guy, so he wins at the end. I mean, certainly he doesn't try to poison everybody with balloons, and he's not murdering people, but early on, you have a Batman that doesn't want to let anybody die, even Jack Napier. And in Sam Hamm's script, he really takes a lot of... He's guilty, and he takes a lot of responsibility for creating the Joker. Here, it's almost just a point of fact for him. You made me, I made you. No condemnation to himself or anything. So how does he feel about that? It's almost as if it's the opposite of the Hamm script, where when you get to the end of this, he's like, okay, the mistake I made wasn't dropping you in the vat of acid, it was letting you live in the first place. I should have dropped you in the acid and then just shot bullets down in there, or I should have set the chemical plant on fire in the first place. There are no consequences to him for trying to kill the Joker. I don't know why Bruce feels the need to lie to Vicki in this scene. He says, we're going away for a while. Alfred just doesn't know anything about this, and so Vicki is already really suspicious of him, thinks that maybe this isn't in the movie, she doesn't talk about it, but I would assume she's got to be thinking maybe he sleeps with a lot of random women and I'm a one-night stand and he's just brushing me off. And that's why she starts investigating, because of course that's what she does, and it comes to find out that it's a lot more complicated than that. But what is Bruce doing all day where he can't hang out with Vicki Vale? It's treated like the Batman persona is taking over right now. I have to stop everything for a second and say, if you're watching the scene with me right now, if you're not, this is the boardroom scene where we see Joker for the first time with his flesh-colored makeup. You get all the gangsters around this table, and the one to the front on the far right looks a lot like Carmine Falcone from the Batman. He's almost the spitting image of him. He also looks a little bit like Stan Lee. But anyway, it's daytime now. He's maybe going to be doing some research, but is it going to take all day long? What is he doing? I guess is it the same day that he goes to put the flowers in front of the movie theater where his parents died? I don't remember if that's the same day or if that happens later. Well, it either is or the movie plays ambiguous with time. I guess I'm not sure. Speaking of time, let me kind of step back for a second and say that one of the things I've always loved about this movie, as I said at the beginning, is the timelessness of it. And I think the movie even watches a little more timeless now, maybe. I'd love to get the perspective of somebody who was born after me and didn't live with this movie on this, especially like somebody of today's generation, beyond my son Jason or my kids, because they're growing up with this movie, of course. But the reason I say that is because this was always supposed to be a movie out of time, where it's a gangster film that's got a lot of 40s trappings, but then It also has some contemporary technology to the late 80s, and thematically, it's got, at least in the background, some ideas that would resonate with an 80s audience. I think it was right place, right time for serious Batman in particular, but something that's got some clear urban decadence and upheaval specifically, and this, at least visually, very much has that. So that makes it recognizable and timely, even though what you're looking at is German Expressionism. So it feels like you're going back to the 20s and the 30s and the 40s with a lot of things. But then you have some of those ideas that are pretty clearly of the time. But the Prince soundtrack might have taken some people out of that timelessness of it, where it might feel very commercial. We're getting that because he is very popular right now, or this kind of music, this pop music is really popular at the moment. Growing up, I didn't have that. That was just the trappings of the movie, but I wonder how a lot of adults felt about it. And of course, that was part of the start of a lot of these concept albums and the music inspired by and made for the movie albums, and everything in the movie being merchandised in some way or another. You know, if I could get in a time machine, one of the places I would immediately want to go is back to 89 to watch the merchandising train and the Batmania of it all in that summer. In hindsight now, as an adult, I would love to know what that was like. Not at 5 and 6 years old, but at 38, 39 years old. But the point I was trying to make is I appreciate this even better now as a timeless sort of thing, because now it's sort of like a point I made with Back to the Future in a video not too long ago. It feels period when you watch it now, even for the 80s stuff. That doesn't feel like contemporary stuff seeping in so much as even now a product of an earlier time that's all mixed into all of that. And there's nothing from right now that can encroach in on it and distract you because it wasn't made now. So that's the thing I really appreciate about it. Yeah, this must be the same day. So he says, so I guess the idea is, and this is why I kind of appreciate doing this while looking at the movie. Yeah, I could have gone 10 minutes on a tangent that would have been totally pointless. I can't meet you today because he's not saying this, but because I have to go and pay tribute to my parents. But I mean, is it going to take all day long? And I realize that you're a very private person, but why do you have to say you're going out of town? I don't understand that. Why don't you just say I'm busy? Even if you have to lie, you could tell a more benign lie, or a lie that wouldn't get you into so much trouble with her, because all you have to do is say, I've got a board meeting this afternoon, or whatever it happens to be. I've got something I got to do for work. And then you could go see her the next day. You could go see her in the evening like you just did the night before. I've said in lots of videos about this movie that the Can You Pass the Salt scene is one of my favorites because it's so bizarre and I don't understand really anything about it. I've never been in this room before. Is very funny, and we need that kind of levity with Bruce Wayne, certainly, but it's also part of just that overall confusion that he has. He might be telling the truth with that. I'm not sure if that's him being charming or if he is sort of literally going in and out of personalities when that kind of thing is happening. Bob the Hun, adults loved this film. People thought it was deep and psychological, and that's true, and that might sound silly in hindsight if you're younger and you weren't there at the time and you've grown up with smarter, more sophisticated, character-driven versions of Batman that are, you know, much more literary, certainly, and that really draw that character out. But I look at this movie as almost a proof of concept before it's anything. And it is better than that, don't get me wrong. But when you look at special features on the disc and you listen to the producers involved in this movie talk about it, and you listen to Tim Burton talk about it, I almost said Bruce Timm. I want a before and after puzzle on Wheel of Fortune that says Bruce Timm Burton. Anyway, when you listen to those guys talk about it, first and foremost, what always comes up is everyone compared Batman to the 60s show. We had to prove to them that that's not what we were doing. And in casting Michael Keaton, we made people even more afraid that's what we would do because he was known as a comedic actor and because he didn't look like a leading superhero type guy. And compared to that, people said, oh boy, thank goodness this is exactly what we wanted. It's dark, it's serious, it's not made exactly for your children, but it's also fun. It's not overly violent like parents would complain Batman Returns was a little bit later. I also think that sensibilities and sensitivity was changing quite a bit just 3 years later by 1992. I wonder how this movie would have been received in 92. Not to take up too much for Batman Returns, because I agree with some of those complaints, but that's just a thought I had in the moment. 89 and 92, it's weird, the chasm. It feels like 8 or 10 years go by between those years. It's sort of like, I'm going to run it off with myself right now, but it's sort of like between Rocky 4 and Rocky 5, when Rocky is in Russia, and then when you get to Rocky 5, all of a sudden he gets on a plane, he comes back, and it's the 90s. That's what 89 to 92 feels like. I mean, this is so much a product of the 80s and simultaneously is so influential to what the 90s would look like. It might be hyperbolic to say that this is the most important or most influential film of the 80s, but it's definitely one of them. And not just for superhero and comic book things. It would be interesting to see what the world would have looked like. Alfred's always prepared. He's always got water. It would be interesting to see what the world would look like if this movie didn't exist, because I think if you could see that alternate reality, you'd realize just how much influence this had on movies and television and everything. Nick Young, people got upset about Keaton, but didn't learn their lesson from 2006 and 2007 with Heath Ledger. That's exactly right. And I think that still happens. People had it with Pattinson. Like, we can talk about this just with Batman. People had it with Pattinson. People had it with Ben Affleck. There's an assumption based on roles people have had before that you can't fit in the box that I have for this character. It's not going to be authentic if you play to the same type that you usually do. And very often these are the same people, and I think we're often all guilty for it, about it to some degree. I couldn't see Tom Hardy as Bane, for instance, but I think, again, I think we're all sometimes guilty of this, where simultaneously we'll say that, but we also don't like to see people typecast, where it's like, well, which is it? You're typecasting it yourself if you're saying this person can't possibly play this role because I can't see it. But here's the sticky part. The director might have a take on it that is not what you're thinking, and it might fit for the angle they've got. But then, is that angle going to be authentic to that character? Traditionally, is it going to be what you want at that point? And that can be really a sticky wicket, because just like with Nolan's Batman, in certain ways, this is straight off the page Batman. And in other ways, in very significant ways, it is somebody's, and I would say kind of one guy with Tim Burton, because he changes so much about the flavor of this from what it originally was on the page. It is one guy's interpretation of this character. And it starts from a place that is very much in the spirit of that, and then it moves off and it gains its own life and becomes its own thing. And I really appreciate that, especially now, and I've always loved this movie, of course, because we have so many different iterations of Batman, and I think a lot of them are valid and count and are wonderful expressions of this character, keeping the initial idea and the spirit there, but he's wildly malleable. I've always said that. But it really hasn't been until, in my mind anyway, The Batman, that we've gotten something in live action a lot closer to what I think of as the quintessential kind of comic book Batman. But I think Sam Hamm, and there are certainly things about even that take that I would maybe change if I was working on it, but he's and I don't want to talk too much about that movie, but he's a detective finally. He's never really been that. He's Batman before he's Bruce Wayne. I was going to say this earlier. With Nolan's Batman, especially by the time you get to Dark Knight, you have a Bruce Wayne that uses Batman for his gain as an idea to inspire people, right? So he's like 90% Bruce Wayne, 10% Batman, or maybe he's 100% Bruce Wayne, and Batman is the mask, right? And with The Batman, it's arguably the opposite, or closer to the opposite, where that is that traditional animated series thing. He calls himself Batman in his mind. I could see that version maybe later saying something like that. This is 50-50. This is Batman and Bruce Wayne simultaneously, and he, again, cannot fully reconcile those two things. In Sam Hamm's script, the Joker's plan is more terrifying than it is here. And it's also more thematically interesting, again, with the 80s materialism idea and the commercialism and the idea of his taking over the city being his expressing art while simultaneously trying to take over and sort of make himself everything. It's kind of that Agent Smith thing. And in that script, it's scarier because of some extra things that didn't make it into the movie, like it's done off screen, but there's this clear implication that a baby got hit with Smilex during this commercial, and that whole thing is screwed up. Oh, I also wanted to mention weird takes and line deliveries. This guy, by the end of the commercial, so we're watching the Joker's Brand X commercial. This is, by the way, what I named my Wi-Fi in my house. When you come over and you connect to our Wi-Fi, you connect to Brand X. It is really creepy, the smiles. It's wonderful. And I also like the way the commercial is set up, where we know that these two girls have died, and then the news anchor woman gets hit with Smilex, and then suddenly we see them in the commercial, and it's their corpses all the way through. They are dead, folks. That's messed up. And I love that they went far enough to actually put all of that in the movie. But, as I said, it is quite a bit creepier in the script initially. But, so, the guy running the news program, I love the commercials. One of my favorite things in the movie. And it's one of the things I quote the most. I'm jumping around, but let me also say real quick that some of Joker's best lines are in the initial script. Gentlemen, let's broaden our minds. That was a Sam Hamm line. But a lot of his best lines, where does he get those wonderful toys? Wait till they get a load of me, I think, isn't in the original script. I'm not sure about that one. But some of them might be... You might have to credit the second writer, but I think a lot of it is ad-lib from Jack Nicholson, and that's something also that Tim Burton confirms in his commentary. The guy that is directing the news program has this very strange line delivery when he says, "kill the camera." It took me viewings and viewings to figure out what he was saying. Like, I had to finally turn on subtitles, because it sounds like he says, "Kelly Camry," but it's "kill the camera." Jack Palance also has a little bit of a, and I should have talked about this when we were watching his scenes, but he has a little bit of a does not give a crap attitude as an actor with this movie, as far as I can tell, and he and Tim Burton did not get along great, apparently, where he didn't take Burton real seriously, and he seems a little bit like Brando on the set of Superman, where if he had more lines, I could have almost seen him having the script on the floor or something, because he did not seem like he really cared. But he's such a great actor, he still has a lot of presence and gravitas. He's got this really strange line delivery when we first meet him, when he says something along the lines of, what if Dent figures out our connection with Axis Chemicals? It took me forever to realize that that was all one sentence and that he was talking in the hypothetical. Go back and watch that scene. The delivery of it is very strange. It's almost as if Palance doesn't even know what the lines are and what he's saying. Nick Young, love that Joker. Yeah. Fidelio, Jack Palance could have honestly played Joker if he cared. I agree. Maybe a little older, or maybe a little too old for the part, but I wouldn't have minded an older Joker, certainly. One of the best and most inspired sets in the movie is certainly the Flugelheim Museum. We've got a super chat, and as always, if you're watching live right now and you want to make sure that I talk about something specific, consider leaving a super chat. I'm trying to get to a few of these regular questions as well. Chewbacca's Lover, $5 super chat. People credit this film and Jurassic Park with popularizing the PG-13 rating. Do you agree with that? Dark and edgy, but you can take your kids to it. I think I do agree with that, yeah. I mean, this as a blockbuster popularized all kinds of things that just became commonplace after that we really take for granted and that we've gone to the nines to an absurd degree with. And sure, that's definitely one of them. Most science fiction films, most superhero films, most action movies are all PG-13 things now. And for a lot of parents, I think things like this were borderline, where they took the 13 seriously, partly because everything wasn't PG-13. So my mom begrudgingly let me watch this movie when it was out. I didn't see it in the theater, but I got to see it on video. And I think she found it too violent for me. I was not allowed to watch Jurassic Park until a couple of years after it came out. And that hurt my feelings because, of course, that was all over advertising. You saw it everywhere you went. It was dinosaurs. Kids love dinosaurs. But also, it, just like this movie, had lots of merchandising that was directed at a kid audience. And I think there were a lot of arguments happening with adults and parents at that time about all these things that were being marketed to children that were pretty clearly not for them, especially rated R things like RoboCop and Terminator. But movies like this would sometimes fall in that category as well. I go back and forth on whether my favorite Prince song in the soundtrack is Party Man or the song during the balloon sequence at the end. I love them both kind of equally, I think. I'm going to read some more pre-written questions that I got on YouTube. Discussing topics, how do you feel about some of the casting that could have been? Would Sean Young have worked as Vicki Vale? Would you have accepted Robin Williams as Joker? Personally, I think he would have made a good Riddler. I agree with that. I see him as Riddler before I see him as the Joker. And I always have. That's the main name that always comes up as an actor that could have played the Joker, and I don't remember if he was... I think he was straight up considered. I could see the argument that as written in the original Ham script, Williams might have been as appropriate or more so than Jack Nicholson. It's kind of odd to say that he might have played it straighter and more like what was on the page, considering that he was such an improv comedian. But at this point in his career, before he's a huge movie star, because you have to remember that hasn't quite happened yet. Like, he's well liked, but he's still, this isn't far enough after Popeye. He's still trying to get his movie career off the ground, at least in a real big way. I forget if Good Morning Vietnam had come out yet. I think maybe it had. But he would have probably stuck a little bit closer to a script, or if not, at least played it a little less just straight Robin Williams, or maybe even if he did that, that would have felt more like Comic Book Joker than Jack Nicholson's. There's a little bit more about the Corto Maltese in Sam Hamm's script, believe it or not. Vicki talks about having been there and what she experienced. I also meant to say in how it changed her, and it was tragic and difficult to deal with. And there's this wonderful exchange that she has with Knox, and I meant to talk about this when they first meet at the beginning. When Knox meets Vicki Vale, first of all, they know each other already. They're either already partners or being partnered up, but they work at the same place, and she's not new to Gotham. I don't know why that's changed. I don't know why we kind of needed that to be part of the origin thing, along with Jack Napier, becoming the Joker, but that was changed at some point. I don't know if that was the other writer, Scarin, I think is his name, or what. But anyway, when he says somebody could get hurt doing this, when he's looking at the cover that she shot at Corto Maltese, she says, in his script, it goes farther, and she says, I do get hurt. That's fantastic. She is a very different character in that script. And I think that the same actress could have played her, Basinger, and still managed to do the job. She is transformed into a little bit too much of a standard damsel in distress type, unfortunately, with a real typical love story, or maybe unconventional in the wrong way, if that makes any sense, because not only does she show up and automatically fall in love with the hero, and some of us kind of question whether the chemistry is really there, but the script is changed such that she doesn't get very much screen time with him either, because, again, he's walled off from both her and the audience. She's supposed to kind of be our eyes-in character, and so you're not supposed to mind not getting into the head of Batman so much, because Vicki Vale is supposed to be your straight man character who is enamored with Batman like you're supposed to be. But the problem is, she's not drawn enough either, and in that script, she is like a Lois Lane, who is even more of a risk taker, and maybe even more brash and spunkier. And I really liked that take, and it would have been kind of pioneering for this kind of material. And that's one of the things that makes it feel kind of Hollywooded and watered down, is that part of it has changed. And that definitely hurts it story-wise. She wouldn't have been a screamer, I don't think, the way she is here, and that's one of the things that the movie gets made fun of for, including from me. So, let me go back to Vicki in the Flugelheim for a minute, because I talked over it, but a lot of things I've never understood about that. I will be brief in things that I've talked about before with this, but I always thought it was kind of strange that it takes Batman that long to get there, because he's called by Alfred, and he says that Vicki's going to be late going to the museum, but then Bruce says, I'm not meeting her. And I guess the idea is that the Joker has set up this meeting pretending like Bruce is going to go there. And it's kind of curious too, by the way, that she thinks that he's going there to see her photos. But everything with them has been so weird, you think that that would be odd to her, where it's like, okay, you didn't have any time for me, and you pretended like you were going out of town, but now you've called me again to look at my pictures. I also think, and this is also in the Sam Hamm script, I also think it would have been a perfect and better opportunity for Vicki to go have a date with Bruce Wayne under the pretense of shooting his house, because she says at the party, I really like your house, it's interesting, I'd like to shoot it sometime. But they just get together and have dinner, and she's like, and Bruce just making small talk. I guess he's just supposed to be so antisocial, he's really bad at talking to women, but he says, did you have any trouble finding the house? And she's like, no, I didn't. And I'm like, yeah, of course. Because not only was she just there last night, but she really liked your house and wanted to shoot it. She's been thinking about your house. But I guess in the Sam Hamm script, it makes sense that nobody thought to do that because she is, because Bruce doesn't, he declines actually when she says that in that script. She says, I like to shoot your house, and he's like, I'm kind of private. I don't really want anybody poking around too much. But in this version, it could have been there. Anyway, so it's odd that it takes Bruce as Batman that long to get there. It's odd that he comes as Batman. Like, he's making kind of this leap that, oh, the Joker must be there, or something must be horribly wrong. I'm going to drop through the skylight having no idea what's going on. And this is Sam Hamm's fault as much as it is Burton's, because that is in his script too, and I just have never understood that. He drops through the skylight. Has he been, like, up there for a while hoping nobody would look up and see him? And he's like, oh, yep, there's the Joker. I better drop through the skylight. But if that wasn't going on, what would he have done being fully suited up? Like, it'd be super awkward. What if nothing bad was happening at all, and there was some other explanation for why she thought Bruce was going to meet her? I don't know what that would have been, but it'd be really awkward if you were up on the roof and you were like, oh, crap, she's just fine. She's having a Danish and reading a book. I guess I'd better get off this roof and go get this costume off. So that part of it is strange. But I also don't understand what the Joker is planning to do with Vicki Vale. And I guess all these things are supposed to be easily explained by the fact that he's a crazy person. He's psychotic. He's like Heath Ledger Joker. He just does things. But the problem is he takes a lot of his plans to the furthest fruition he's able to. So it's not like he's totally ADD about things. He's not lacking an attention span. He's able to take his chemistry plot all the way until Batman cracks his code and tells everybody about it. So then he just pivots and he decides to invite everybody to a party and throw money at them and then kill them with Smilex gas, while they all just stand around while he's making a speech saying he's going to kill them, and no one's reacting to any of that. A lot of that in this movie. Bob Gunn, none of his goons react. Everybody's fine with that. You guys might be next. Is nobody worried about this? And he, in the scene with Vicki Vale, changes his mind, it seems, about what he wants to do with her 4 times within 35 seconds. Let me interject real quick and say Vicki Vale just dropped, and he says, you weigh a little more than 108. There are lines like that that are a little punchier in the movie than they were in that first draft script. Now, I don't know how many drafts Sam Hamm did himself after that first one, so he may have punched some of that up himself. But the 108 thing is there, but it doesn't read anything like as amusing. I should also mention that, and I have reviewed that script, but I don't know how much of this I've talked about before, and not everybody's going to look at that, so I want to revisit it. Batman right now is taking Vicki Vale to the Batcave through very fake-looking trees, may I add, but it all adds to the charm of it. And in Sam Hamm's script, and here as the Batmobile is driving, the best music cue in the whole movie, by the way, he says, in the Sam Hamm script, he does the one very 60s Batman thing that would have been in this movie had it been kept. And I think I'm glad it's not here. He pulls out a capsule and breaks it and puts it under her nose and has her sniff it, and then she faints. She goes unconscious, and he puts her in the Batmobile. That's Bat Sleep from 60s Batman. Hilarious that was in here at one point. I like the idea that he's maybe just taking a different entrance, and he's able to go so far out of his way that you wouldn't realize that you were going under Wayne Manor. It also doesn't really look like they're going underground at all, so that's sort of odd. But the Joker seems to change his mind constantly about what he wants to do with Vicki Vale, and it's the only thing he does that with. It's like we're struggling to keep her relevant for both of these men. This is not a problem in the original draft. It's much later that he meets Vicki, and he is interested in her. Well, maybe it's not later. I think it is still in the Flugelheim, but sorry, a lot of things are coming to me that I want to mention. Let me sidetrack for a second while we're in the Batcave and say, and this is not in Ham's script, they're great survivors, Batman says about the bats, and that is a really intriguing line that, again, did not come from Ham. I want to think that it gives us a sense of Batman's psychology of this alternate persona that he might literally, arguably, kind of have, where maybe Batman is a part of his psyche that literally is functioning as a survival mechanism. Was Bruce Wayne terrified by bats as a child, and he commandeered that Jungian archetype or whatever? He commandeered that. I just keep going to Batman Begins ideas. He commandeered that idea, that look, that animal, and became a bat as a defense mechanism? Or is it just because they are horrifying and he's not scared of them, but he can use that to scare people? It's really surprising how much of various Batman movies are in Ham's script retroactively, because that whole Batman Begins thing is there. The idea that he is scared of bats and then uses them to strike fear in the hearts of criminals. The Ham script, by the way, also deals with more of Batman's background. We don't get flashbacks or anything to his training, but his training is talked about. And I think it's supposed to be a nod to it when we go to the armory in Wayne Manor and we see his suits of armor, which apparently, by the way, took like 4 months to build, and I don't know why it was such a big deal to make those look as amazing as they do, like why that had to be in the movie, but it's cool, it's there. And I think maybe the idea is he got that stuff while he was training when he was abroad, but we get no mention of it. You'd think the place to do it would be when Knox is telling Vicki right after this scene about Bruce Wayne and would say, he just disappeared for like 7 years or however long. That's kind of unusual. What was going on? I also want to know why the police file on Bruce Wayne has nothing in it. I don't even know why the police would have a file on Bruce Wayne. It's not like he's been in trouble with the law before, but if they have a file, why is nothing in it? Why doesn't the file at least say that his parents were killed by criminals or by a criminal? I don't fully understand that whole thing. I am sure that I will get back to whatever point I was making a minute ago, but let me go ahead and read some more of these comments now. One doomed game critic. A lot of what makes 89 so fascinating is the what could have been questions, the casting, the original Ham script, which I've talked about at length already. Definitely worth bringing up at least. Also, if you haven't seen the fan edit of 89 that turns it into a silent film, you 100% have to. And now that you mention that, I actually have seen some of that, but it's been a long time. I've never actually sat through the whole thing, but it's neat, and I've always thought that this was perfect material to do that with. This would make for a wonderful silent film using the Elfman score And it makes a lot of sense because as much as I love, and of course you can do it in intertitles, but as much as I love a lot of the quotable dialogue in this movie, I could see it feeling maybe like it makes more sense if you don't have all the dialogue and if you're just looking at the action in it, because it's such a visually dependent film, and there, of course, a lot of visual storytelling, and the storytelling, again, is so much less traditional and character-driven, and storytelling in more of a fairy tale sense and more about the way it makes you feel. And that has always worked for me with this movie, just letting it wash over me, not even thinking so much about story, than something like Batman Returns, where it's much more distracting, and it feels a little bit less timeless than this. I don't want to spend a lot of time comparing those movies, but that always felt much more like a commercial product to me than this does. Where if I start actually thinking about the story, I get very confused. Returns, I feel like, is almost inviting me to do that, or I can't help but think about the story and character motivations and how nothing is making sense. This movie, that is not what I'm focused on. And I meant to say this at the beginning, but some of this, again, may be nostalgia. But when I'm watching this movie, it's almost more like a rock album or something. It's almost like listening to music before it's like watching a film. And again, visual component, I'm certainly watching it. But what I mean is, it acts more like atmosphere. It's not a background music movie. I like to sit down and focus on it, but it's almost more like performance art or something, which is interesting because, of course, that's what the Joker is all about. And that reminds me, I wanted to make this point earlier when I was talking about merchandising and commercialism using the icons of Batman and the Joker to accomplish what they're accomplishing. If there's any social commentary in this movie about that at all, and I feel like it is very in the background and I may be even stretching a little bit, it's interesting because the movie itself is making millions and millions of dollars on those very pieces of iconography. So now we get the, you know how a normal person's speech, which is my favorite moment in this movie, maybe. I quote it all the time. And this is the moment that the commentator earlier was talking about, where perhaps Bruce can't tell Vicki that he's Batman because he doesn't feel like Batman. And that's another personality he has, and he's not being that character right now. And if it's that literal, I kind of like the idea that toward the beginning of the movie, he doesn't even think to go to the Batcave because he's not dressed as Batman. He's not being Batman then. Almost as if Batman has this, like, hold on him, this control over him. We're not told that he made a vow to his parents. But if that were the case, or for whatever reason he feels the need to do this, I like the idea, and this is not psychologically exactly my Batman, but it's a cool take on it. The idea that Bruce would be controlled by this aspect of his personality that is compelled to do this. But he himself, and this is where any humanity in this character at all lies, he himself doesn't want to do this and is distracted by it and burdened by it, and all he wants to do is live a regular life and get to date a pretty girl like Vicki Vale and be a philanthropist and help people with his wealth like a normal rich person. You know, a normal rich person gets up in the morning and spends a bunch of money on a car, and, you know, this is, I'll get to super chats in a moment, this is the absolute most contrived scene in the movie, and I'll tell you why. So what we're looking at right now is the Joker having shown up after Bruce tried to say I'm Batman and couldn't get it out. And there's Lawrence holding his boombox. And the only reason that this scene is here is for Bruce to realize the Joker killed his parents, so that now it can become a revenge thriller and become like The Punisher in the third act, like Death Wish. And it's crazy that it just generates into that, and that ultimately he's just a vengeance vigilante for the rest of this. What will vengeance solve? I guess everything. But the point I'm trying to make is the Joker shows up here for absolutely no reason. This is part of that point I made earlier where it's very strange, all the different things he wants to do with Vicki Vale. He cannot make up his mind. When he's in the Flugelheim, he starts with, I want you to photograph my exploits and be part of this team. And then it turns into, what do you know about Batman? And then it turns into, oh, you don't know anything about Batman. I'm just going to kill you with my flower. And now he shows up to her apartment and he wants, you think for a minute, to kidnap her and take her with him, pardon me. But he's not there to do that either, because he has every opportunity to bring her with him. He thinks he has killed Bruce Wayne, who is pretending to be dead. I don't fully understand his plan either. Hopefully I'll have the time to talk about this, because I don't get it. And the Joker leaves the box. I don't know if his initial plan was to bring the box, let it pop out, and then hope that she fainted and he'd take her with her, or take her with him. But it doesn't matter, because he doesn't do that. I wanted to make this point real quick too. I'm only laughing on the outside. My smile is just skin deep. That speaks to the theme I was talking about earlier, the parallel, pardon me, the flip between Batman and the Joker, where Batman is, if he's smiling at all, smiling on the inside, and the Joker is smiling on the outside. That's the yin-yang of it. But anyway, so the Joker, it has no reason to go there, because he doesn't do anything. And it's just so that we'll find out later on, retroactively, that Bruce can hear the dance with the devil line, and that will make him realize who killed his parents. That whole thing is handled very oddly and interestingly. It's the inverse from how you would conventionally deliver it to an audience, and it's also the opposite of how it's handled in the Sam Hamm script, because we get a flashback to Bruce's parents' death much earlier in that script, and it helps us get in Batman's head, which Tim Burton is not interested in at all. So he gives us information backwards. It is a reveal to Bruce that the Joker has killed his parents, but we don't know on a first viewing what in the world Joker's talking about. So when he says, "You ever dance with the devil in the pale moonlight?" Bruce's reaction is supposed to telegraph, oh, he recognizes that line. Now, the delivery that Michael Keaton gives makes me think that he doesn't fully understand what's going on in that scene either, because he just says, "What?" As if it's the same thing the audience is thinking. It's just a really friggin' weird thing to say, right? And then we'll get the flashback to his parents' death, and that becomes a reveal for the audience. It's backwards. You would think that Bruce Wayne, as our protagonist, we would get to get in his head and experience things from his perspective, and we would understand that his parents were murdered, just pretend like you don't know anything about Batman, earlier in the film. And then, when we get Dance with the Devil, we, along with Bruce, can go, oh, snap! The Joker killed his parents! But that's not what it is, because Tim Burton doesn't want Batman at the end of the day to be the protagonist of this story, or at the very least, he doesn't... Bruce is a character that does not see himself as relatable, and is a recluse, and is neurotic again, and is separated from society, and so that's how Tim Burton wants to depict him for the audience. He wants us to see him on the outside, because that's how he sees himself, and that's what Tim Burton himself can relate to. But the problem is, so, like, the thing that makes him unrelatable is the thing we're supposed to relate to, I guess, is what I'm saying. And it's very risky
because the majority of people are not going to catch on to everything that's interesting about him right away, especially if you're familiar with Batman at all from the comics. And on a bunch of repeat viewings, I appreciate it, I respect it. It's not what I would do, certainly, but it's taken me a long time to really understand why he's played that way exactly. And the angle that Tim Burton has on Bruce Wayne, and the reason he cast Michael Keaton, is because he needed a somewhat diminutive guy that has a crazed look about him, because he thinks that you would have to be a little crazy to be Batman. He's this extreme personality, as I said, but somebody that is not intimidating without a Batman costume. And so you wouldn't go for a traditional leading man. And it's a cool idea, but I think you could do that and also let us in with him a little bit and have your cake and eat it too with it, where we would get all the things that Burton finds interesting about him and why he is not understood by the rest of the world, but let us in, let us understand him a little bit. If not that, you have to draw Vicki and maybe Knox as well a lot more than you did to make them the Eisen characters. Knox, by the way, has a wonderful death scene in the Sam Hamm script that I wish was in the movie, and it's played much more as a Woodward and Bernstein sort of thing, where that's still here to some degree. Again, a lot of things that are not left on the cutting room floor, but just bits and pieces of what it used to be when it was more coherent and cohesive. Knox figures out Bruce Wayne as Batman in like the first half hour, 45 minutes of the movie in the Sam Hamm script. And Vicki doesn't believe him, but he puts a bug in her ear that as she's getting more and more clues, she comes to realize that that is indeed who Bruce Wayne is. And there's this awesome scene where Knox kind of dresses Bruce down and says, and some of this is because he wants to be with Vicki himself, of course. That is still intact here. And he says, you don't have a future with Vicki Vale. That future motif again. Think about the future. You can't have a future with Vicki Vale. You are married to being Batman. And what are you going to do? He says something along the lines of, what are you going to do, get married and have, like bat kids? And that is a really cool idea that, and makes these characters come alive and are more relatable, and I wish all of that was somehow still in the movie. But I also like the movie we have for what it is and for the weirdness of it. There's this deconstruction that you do when you start reading the initial script with a thing like this, where there's all these interesting mysteries. How in the world did it turn into what it is? Where you have all these scraps that are kind of put back together. Especially with a piece like this, where the third act suddenly changes and is nothing like the original, or very little of it is like the original script. And then when you read that old script, it all starts to make sense. And I have kind of a bittersweet thing with it, where I'm like, well, it's not as mysterious as it used to be. I always thought this guy looked amazing. Like, it's crazy how close he is in the face to Jack Nicholson. He's got those eyebrows. Where's that guy now? Could we have him do a biopic as Jack Nicholson? I mean, I'm sure he's probably in his 60s now, but he can play Jack Nicholson a little later in life. Tell kind of some sort of story just as he's going into retirement. That'd be great. I wonder if he's still acting. There was a writer's strike right as this movie was being made, which has something to do with why Sam Hamm couldn't keep working on it and why the third act was changed. Now, I don't fully understand that, because they're working from the script they have, and Hamm had already written it years prior. All Tim Burton talks about in the commentary, and maybe somebody knows more about this than I do and can leave comments about it, all Tim Burton says in the commentary is that things went off the rails. He says it unraveled, and he said, I hope this never happens again. It's interesting, he seems proud of the movie, but he's also frustrated with a lot of the way the end of it came together. And he is very cryptic about it. I don't know if it's studio meddling or what exactly happened, but they were flying by the seat of their pants, changing things on the day and making up script. And that's why that third act makes as little sense as it does. And I understand that they'd already decided not to have the Robin sequence, and there were some things at the end of that script that were probably a little too ambitious. Like the bat sequence that is in Batman Begins later, with all the bats that's right out of year one, that was in that script. Maybe they wouldn't have been able to do that, but very strange. Like, I wonder if maybe it was just a budget issue where they finally got to the end and went, oh, we can't shoot half of this, but we also can't bring Ham back because of this writer strike that's going on. So it messed up the third act of this movie. There's a lot of fun stuff in the third act, and there's a charm to how much stuff doesn't make sense, certainly, and we'll talk about some of it, I'm sure. But it did that to this movie, and it gave us the worst episode of Season 2, Star Trek The Next Generation. Let me take a look at these Super Chats. Bob the Hun, $5 Super Chat. Hamill could say all of Joker's dialogue of this film without it being out of place. I agree. Also, they considered Willem Dafoe and Tim Curry for this film. There were several different people that were considered. I've also heard Brad Dourif was considered. But the studio didn't want to go for anybody that wasn't recognizable enough. And I get the sense that Jack Nicholson was maybe a studio idea. I don't know that for sure, but it wasn't Tim Burton's first choice. He talks about it like, I don't think it was Tim Burton's first choice. And I don't mean to call Tim Burton a liar or anything. I think he might just be remembering things wrong retroactively in his commentary, which was done, in mid-2000s? But the reason I say that is because I've heard stories from other people, like Brad Dourif, that Burton was thinking about other people before they even thought about Jack Nicholson, and I tend to believe that's probably true. But there was discussion, but anyway, he talks about it in the commentary like there was never any discussion about any other actor, and we just know that that's not true. Where he's like, Jack Nicholson is so perfect, he is the Joker, maybe he's too perfect. And I mean, I do agree with all of that, but there were other people that were considered, certainly. So let me backtrack for a second and say that for the longest time, especially when I was a kid, I didn't understand the impetus for Batman blowing up Axis chemicals. The idea, as I alluded to earlier, is that he realizes that the Joker killed his parents because of Dance with the Devil. And so he rushes out to blow up Axis chemicals. And he is trying to kill the Joker. For the longest time, I was always like, I don't know why he doesn't do that earlier. Like, he could have done that at any point. I also don't understand why the police don't go raid Axis Chemicals, knowing that the Joker is probably working out of it. I've never really understood that. And the big tell, finally, for me, was paying closer attention to Joker when he says the line, "Missed me," when he shows up in his helicopter. Batman was trying to kill him in that scene. And he missed. And the rest of the movie, that's all he's doing. We are in something of a kids playing with action figures place now. Bob the Hun, once again, thanks for the Super Chat, man. $5 Super Chat. Apparently, DC just recently confirmed 89 is the same universe as Donner's Superman. Is that cool or just stupid? Alex Ross art of them together years before. Well, and there's been a lot of talk about that with the Batman 89 and Superman 78 comics and all of that. I don't like the idea that the studio gets to decide years later if these two things count in the same continuity. And there's been an argument that for certain producers and creators and people that they always thought about it that way. It doesn't work in my brain. It doesn't really make sense. Superman is too squarely in the year that it's in. And I think that works great for that movie. I also like the ways these movies are in different genres and do feel like they're in different universes, and I just don't want them to be in the same universe. I think back in the day there was some talk about trying to do a Batman-Superman movie with Keaton and Reeve, and if that had happened, if it was cool, okay, and you retroactively could have said they're in the same universe, I would have seen that as a misstep. Some of it is personal taste, but also there's an integrity thing here for me. I just think that one of these things is much more stylized than the other. One is timeless, and the other is a timeless movie, but not set in a timeless setting with Superman. That's part of the point of that movie, right? Is that it's contemporary for that time. 1978, we feel like we live in a cynical world that isn't going to get better, and we still have the Vietnam and then Cold War thing very squarely in the back of our minds, and we're thinking it just doesn't feel like anything's going to get better, and people don't care about each other anymore, and what happened to the American dream and honesty and decency. And that was 40 years ago, but people felt that way. I guess 45 years ago. And again, this movie has some timeless ideas in the background, but it does not take place in 1989. Okay, let me read some more of these pre-written comments. Christian Ogden, is this the best interpretation of Gotham City we've gotten in a movie? I believe it is. He says, I'm talking about the aesthetics, the design. I'm torn between this and Matt Reeves' version as the best. I love what Reeves did with it as well, certainly. Matt Reeves, not Christopher Reeve. And it is certainly stylized in its own way. It's not exactly the same kind of timeless. This is... I would argue that this feels like a visually much more 1940s detective noir piece, even though it's not exactly a detective story. I mean, Batman figures out the code for the Joker's chemicals, but his computer kind of does all the work, right? And there's a little bit more of a neo-noir thing going on, arguably, with Matt Reeves' Batman. But for me, just personal taste, and again, some of it is nostalgia, certainly, but I would put this over that if you put a grapnel gun to my head and I had to choose. This is a Batman who, I should say, absolutely uses guns. He doesn't go around with a handgun, but who cares? He's got rocket launchers on his... I guess not rocket launcher. He's got rockets that he shoots out of his missiles that he shoots out of his bat plane, of his Batwing, and he's got machine gun turrets on his Batmobile, and he blows up Axis chemicals, not caring who else is inside. That's where we completely lose any humanity with this character, I think. It goes without saying, just because I've talked about this a lot before, but in case you haven't heard me talk about these things, the Batmobile and the Batwing are my definitive favorite versions of both. They're absolute perfection, and again, also very timeless. They work in any era. Maybe not any era, but we'll never get to a place where I go, that's 280s. I love the idea of building the Batmobile around a missile. I love the idea of just taking the symbol and turning it into a plane. It looks very aerodynamic in the first place. And it's kind of neat branding, right? Because the movie was sold so hard on... I can't believe I haven't brought this up yet, but it was sold so hard on just that image. The movie opens going in and out of the bat symbol. You don't even realize that's what you're looking at. You're thinking maybe this is the Bat Cave. It kind of makes you start to think perhaps this is a visualization of the recesses of Bruce Wayne's mind, and then you back off, and it's that symbol that the movie has been sold on, but in like a rock crag formation. And then we get this wonderful reveal of the Batwing in the third act, and it is the shape of that symbol that the Thing has been sold to you with on posters, that it hasn't even felt the need to put the name of it on, because you just know what that is. It's wonderful. It's one of the most provocative images in popular culture, and is the thing that made me a Batman fan. That image, before even seeing the movie, when I was a kid, my dad gave me a t-shirt. I've told this story on the old Written Rewind. I had to know what that was, and I was a Batman fan before I even knew what Batman looked like. So, probably the scene that is most indicative of this idea that it's all about style and how it makes you feel is the Batwing going up to the moon, because there's no story reason for it whatsoever, and Batman, who, by the way, is fueled completely by emotion right now and just wants to kill the guy who murdered his parents, takes the time to just be a show-off and go up to the moon with his plane. And there are a number of places where it's like Batman knows that he's in a movie and an audience is watching. You also have this at the end when he's standing on the skyscraper. Why is he up there? I got in the movie somehow. It's a cool dramatic image. I've talked about this 1,000 times, but we're talking about story and we're talking about stuff that doesn't make a lot of sense, so I have to bring it up again. Batman is shooting the Joker with his missiles and his machine guns out of his Batwing. He's got the angriest face he's had the whole movie. He wants this man dead. Every opportunity to take him out right now, and it doesn't happen. And I've had people suggest to me that maybe he gets Joker in his sights like that because he's intentionally shooting around him and he's just trying to intimidate him. I don't understand that. He's out for blood. Why not just kill him right now? He gives Joker every opportunity to bring out that long gun and shoot his plane and bring him down, so the model of his plane will crash into a model of a church. I don't really know why he does that. The Joker and Bruce Wayne are also both very bulletproof in this movie, and it's odd because Bruce Wayne knows it and doesn't know it. So the Joker just stands there like, I'm not going to get killed. I'm the Joker. I'm Jack Nicholson. They can't get rid of me. They need me in this movie. I got to have as much screen time as possible. Well, Bruce does the same thing when he goes to leave the rose at his parents' death site. He's walking around. There's a shootout. There's bullets flying everywhere. He barely even flinches when one grazes his shoulder. But then later, when he's in Vicky's apartment, he has the foresight to take a metal tray and put it under his shirt, just in case the Joker decides to shoot him. Almost as if he's read the script and he knows that's going to happen. He doesn't even have a symbol, a target, for the Joker to shoot at, like he does when he has the Batsuit. And by the way, Sam Hamm put that in his script, where he has an explanation for why that's there. And I've heard a lot of fans talk about this, the idea that it's not silly to have the oval, because if you pad that out enough, you could make that intentionally the place that you try to get crooks to shoot at, or thugs to shoot at. That's actually what Hamm says it is. Well, Bruce, who was very bulletproof in that earlier scene, I guess he's got a lot of Kevlar. Sam Hamm's script says it's not Kevlar, it's something that's not even to market yet. It's better than Kevlar. And then in that scene he goes, oh man, whatever I'm wearing underneath this isn't going to be enough. I better have this metal tin. And then the Joker shoots him, and then he pretends like he's dead, and then he escapes. I guess he knows the Joker's not going to kidnap Vicki Vale. Wouldn't he look like a total jerk face if he just ran off and then the Joker did take Vicki Vale? It's almost like he read the script. So they are writing on the day as they're shooting this scene. And the story goes, according to Tim Burton, that Jack Nicholson asked him, why are we climbing the stairs? Like, what is my character trying to accomplish here? What am I doing? And Tim Burton says, I don't know, just go with it. And so he goes up the stairs. Now, we know that he's asked for transportation for 2 from his helicopter. Better make it 10. And he's taken Vicki with him. And once again, he keeps changing his motivation for having Vicki Vale. He grabbed her before he even knew if Batman had survived the plane crash. So has he now finally decided that he's going to replace Alicia with Vicki Vale? Alicia, who we've not really talked about, but who he made in his image. And because he's trying to make, it's clearer in Ham's script, but the idea is he is perverting faces and art and everything to, he's so narcissistic he has to make everything look like it's in his image. Is he going to finally do that with Vicki Vale? Is that his whole plan? And this is where it just degenerates into formula. Even before we've had a lot of superhero movies, you've had a lot of action movies, and you've had a lot of things that are in this mode where, well, the bad guy, of course, is going to have the female love interest with him, and the hero has to save her. And he's going to do that by dropping the villain from a high place. By the way, Tim Burton claims that the reason that the Joker is killed at the end of the movie is because he didn't want it to look like sequel bait. So in case they made more, he didn't want you to leave the theater going, or in case they didn't get to make more, I guess, he didn't want people leaving the theater going, oh man, he's going to come back, they're going to make more. He didn't want to promise that. And in his mind, the Joker being such a quintessential, iconic character and a mysterious sort of character, even though he made him a lot less of a mystery here, surely you could come up with a way to bring him back, so it's not a big deal. That was his thinking. He talks about that in his commentary. Bill Mills. Different rumored actors at the time for the roles, like Pierce Brosnan and Kevin Costner. I don't immediately see Brosnan. There are actors that played Bond or could play Bond that I could maybe see in both roles. I guess I'm mostly just saying that because Adam West was almost Bond, but I don't immediately see Brosnan in that role. But I also have never liked Brosnan's American accent, so like I kind of need him to be British. And Kevin Costner is maybe more conventional than Keaton, but less conventional than some other like real muscular, Hollywood types. I could see that more. That's interesting. That one I'd not heard. So this scene, while it doesn't make a lot of sense, is of course a lot of fun, wonderfully atmospheric. Jack Nicholson is having the best time with all the gags. And I do like that we finally get more of that, because we haven't had a ton of Joker gags up to this point. The teeth and his lending a hand. You wouldn't hit a guy with glasses. And that's because Batman and the Joker haven't really had that tete-a-tete yet, that physical matchup. And I like that when he finally fights the Joker fights like the Joker. It's all very straight out of comics. And I appreciate that about it a lot. Walter the Wobot, the cave, what's the deal with all that concrete and the pipes terminating over the void? I don't believe Bruce poured all that. It must be city infrastructure of some kind. How isolated is Wayne Manor in this movie? I seem to remember hearing that the concrete is the foundations of the city that looks like it erupted out of hell and kept growing. That's fascinating. I'd never heard that before. Yeah, it bears noodling, but I've never really thought to think too much about that, because Gotham City, just in general, all the architecture and the Gothic imagery is built in such a way where it feels like this is a lived-in city that's got a massive history and almost like a world all to its own. I can't even really imagine what the rest of the world outside of Gotham looks like here. and I haven't brought this up at all, but I have to wonder, and this dates the commentary, but I have to wonder if The Flash is even going to attempt to have a Gotham that looks at all like this, or if it's going to really ignore that. And we don't know for sure how 89 Batman that is, so much as just Keaton playing Batman again and all that iconography is there, but it's technically a different universe. I don't think we really know that yet. And I'm very nervous about that whole thing. And I want to be excited about that, and I guess I am in seeing Keaton get to play it one more time, but I'm anxious about that whole thing. But anyway, I really like I really like that idea, the concrete, or the foundations of the city just continue to grow like that, where it's so decadent. They haven't done anything to it in eons. It's like there's no city, like, Tim Burton always talks about it like the New York City Planning Commission is all jacked up. And then I like the idea that they're basically living in a no man's land before there's actual no man's land, right? Where the city just doesn't even repair anything. They're just living in decadence. Myers, 1963, what are your thoughts on Have You Ever Danced with the Devil in the Pale Moonlight line? I've never, and there's Batman saying it right now, I've never wanted to overthink it too much, because when the Joker says, I just like the sound of it, I've always kind of taken that at face value, where it's just a thing he says to be poetic and intimidating, and because he gets off on his victims' last moments. People are action figures to the Joker. The world is his playground, and he's, again, making it in his own image. And you can take that line somewhat literally. He is acting as the devil. He's the Grim Reaper, while Batman is pretending to be the Grim Reaper, right? And he says, you ever dance with the devil in the pale moonlight? I am the devil. This is your end. The pale moonlight represents no hope, I guess. And of course, Batman says it back to the Joker because he has every intention on killing him. And you'd think the natural way this would go would be for Vicki to maybe surprise Batman and say, well, you can't kill him, you'd be just as bad as him. And I've seen that moment in superhero things a million times. I'm not saying that I necessarily wish that's how this had gone, but it's of course a very early superhero movie in the grand scheme, and it wouldn't have been that old yet. Just be kind of a natural place for it to go. It goes without saying, but this is now maybe we could consider like the one of the major grandfathers of superhero movies. It is the blueprint for comic book movies and superhero things for the next decade at least. And I would make the argument that that doesn't really change until, at least for darker, more gritty comic book things, that doesn't really change until there's a change of hands that happens with Batman Begins. Batman and then Batman again, Batman Begins, end up being the foundation for what we keep building on for a lot of these kinds of things. And then Spider-Man does that just before that for more lighthearted Superman or superhero things. So I would argue that DC gets a monopoly on it in the 70s and 80s into the 90s. And they are together kind of the parents of the genre. Everything that tried to do a superhero thing up until Batman 89, there weren't a lot of them, but almost everything was looking at Superman. And you had some pulp-derived things, or some more pulp-esque things like Swamp Thing and stuff, that would more kind of monster things that are going more to EC Comics and DC and Marvel Comics that are more on the monster side and that sort of thing. But by and large, it's Superman until you get to this. And then it's Batman through the 90s. But Superman is still an influence, especially when you get to some more lighthearted things. Then, interestingly, you get parents like that at the beginning of the 2000s with X-Men and Spider-Man. And X-Men is informing arguably the darker stuff. X-Men and Blade maybe together. And then Spider-Man is informing the more hopeful, lighthearted stuff. So I think it's interesting that for those eras, it's first DC is the parents with 2 films, and then Marvel is the parents with 2 films. And then once you get past that, in the late 2000s, with 2008, with Dark Knight, and so not a big gap between Begins and Dark Knight, certainly, but with Dark Knight and Iron Man, now your parents are Marvel and DC. So that's interesting. I just talked over the Joker's death, but Batman clearly kills him on purpose, and now Gordon and the rest of the city are going to applaud him for it and ask no questions at all, as a commenter suggested earlier. We have another super chat, I think. Let me go ahead and get that read real quick. Oh, we have a couple. Robert Wild, $2 super chat. Have you seen the silent film edit of 89 yet? I mentioned that earlier. I've never watched all of it, but what I've seen of it, I really, really like. And it might be fun to do a watch party on that at some point. We should consider doing that. So I want to think that the laughing bag is Burton's way of saying what he said in the commentary. There's a chance that Joker is still alive. Maybe the joke is, the Joker after he's dead is laughing. So the joke might be somehow he's going to come back. Or that the idea of the Joker lives on. That's the other way you could read that. Especially because in Ham's comics, you have a Joker gang of criminals that are lookalikes and pretending to be the Joker. Bob the $102 super chat, and I imagine he would have continued doing that kind of thing maybe, although he doesn't have that in his Batman 2 script, I don't think. I can't say Returns because that's not really based on that script. Bob the $102 super chat, this film invents the grapnel gun, not in the comics before. If that's true, I didn't realize that. And of course, the iconography of this movie, more than anything, informs the Batman animated series, and it uses the melody of the theme. It's reworked a little bit, where it's syncopated differently. And Shirley Walker, who conducted the orchestra for this movie, is the conductor on Batman the Animated Series, and she's brilliant, and she's every bit the composer that Danny Elfman is. I like Danny Elfman a lot, don't get me wrong. Walker is amazing as well. And maybe more versatile. Or maybe was given the chance to be more versatile. To be fair. But I bring that up just to say that when Batman the Animated Series first comes out, you're thinking, because I remember this, you're thinking, oh, it's just going to be a watered-down version of this movie. They're not going to be able to do some of the things you'd want from that, where it's going to be too censored. And, of course, we ended up getting one of the best cartoon shows ever made, and it has a lot more character dimension than this movie does. And again, a lot of what it takes from this is the iconography and the theme, but the characters are much closer to the ones we get in the Sam Hamm script, and the Joker has this whole diatribe, or I shouldn't say diatribe, but he has this line toward the end of that script where he gets mad at Batman for something, and he starts yelling, "That's not funny, that's not funny," and it feels very much like something out of that show. My other favorite bit in the score is the bells at the end of this movie. Never get tired of that. So Batman, there's a lot of Vicki waiting in this. It's really appropriate that Prince has a song on his album called Vicki Waiting, because that's all she does. Batman, at the end of this, makes her sit in the car. Alfred's going to give her champagne while she waits. He sees the bat signal. He's got to run off and stand there for the end of the movie. What's he going to do? It's not like he's going to go down to the press conference and make a speech. What is the point of that? Is he planning on going on patrol right after that? Does he want to stand up there in case anybody happens to be looking up? He's going to go down to the press conference. He's going to say, "I want you to tell all your friends about me. I'm Batman." I didn't talk about the voice at all, but I love the minimal acting job from Keaton. He's always said he's letting the suit do the job for him. He's letting the eyes do the job for him. And he is weirdly intimidating without having to really do very much. And I just love how soft-spoken his Batman is and how little-spoken his Batman is. Robert Wild, $2 Super Chat. Favorite single shot from 89. You can only pick one. Yikes. Okay, I will tell you the thing that immediately comes to mind. I don't even know if this is my favorite. It's just the first thing that came to my mind when you said that, so I'm going to say it. It's the Joker's hand out of the vat of acid. That is one of the major things that always stuck with me when I was a kid. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and read some tweet-length reviews while we're looking at the credits here, and that is something that I'm going to keep going with, even though I am changing the rating system for the commentary show. Like I said earlier, I'm going to continue doing some scripted reviews here and there when I have the time, and I'm going to keep the old 0 to 4 scale for that. But for this, I'm going to go for a different, simpler rating scale where we won't have, midpoint values in between. And some of these guys didn't get the memo quite yet when they put these in. But let me go ahead and start reading these. Super Sad Sack. And by the way, $10... $5 tier on Patreon get you access to these. Super Sad Sack, the stellar performance, that's what he's calling himself on Discord. This is Super Billy. The stellar performances, direction, production design, visuals, and overall ambiance mostly compensate for the film's underwritten characters, thin plot, and lapses in logic, particularly in the third act. Mostly. Or maybe it's just my nostalgia talking. I have a tough time with that too. It was really hard on this last viewing before, preparing for this, to get my head out of the space of just, this is something I love, and this is something that's fun to wash over you like an album. Doolittle, pardon me, it's a poetic gothic blockbuster, and I love it because of that. Lord GB, or maybe it's G flat, I'm not sure if that's a musical term, maybe. My appreciation for Burton's Batman has gone up and down over the years. This one's a little longer than they're supposed to be, but I'll read it. As a kid, I liked it, but preferred Batman Forever. As a teenager, reading Batman comics, I thought it was okay, but kind of standard fare, and it never really felt like the same Batman as from the source material. However, as an adult, after numerous other Batman reboots, I appreciate Burton's a lot more. What is unique about Batman in live action is that all of his incarnations feel very specific to their filmmakers. Pattinson's Batman is very Reeves, Affleck's is very Snyder, Bale's is very Nolan, Kilmer and even Clooney's depiction are very Schumacher, and Keaton's is very Tim Burton. It has always amazed me how early into Burton's career this was. The man was barely 30, yeah. He'd only directed 2 movies. He'd only directed a couple films. And here WB was tossing him behind the wheel of this massive production, which was the biggest movie made in England at the time. I don't think biggest movie ever made, most expensive, but it was close. And it was definitely the biggest thing done in England and at Pinewood. A smart choice is it is hard to imagine a superhero movie landscape without Batman 89. Yes, absolutely. Sorry, it went a bit over the tweet length. That's true, but I really appreciated your review. Wonderful. Austin, the Day Ghost. I'm a capitalist. I'm just ahead of the curve. I'm Batman. 3 out of 4. And I should mention that the line I'm Batman was also not in Sam Hamm's original script. And I think I like it better without it. It just seems a little bit odd, this sort of urban legend that, I mean, yeah, you want all your friends to know about him, but he's getting a lot of mileage out of being a supernatural wraith with people wondering if he's even human. It's kind of odd that you would put man in your name like that and call yourself that. And Tim Burton says in his commentary that the reason that line is there, and of course it's one of the quintessential most famous things from this movie, and most Batman movies have continued to have a line. We didn't do it with this last one, but he says, "I'm vengeance" instead, and that was intentional. But Burton says it was to really hammer home, really cement, this is not the TV show Batman. I'm Batman. This is what Batman is now. Connor Nielsen, there is a fine line between style over substance and style as substance. Yeah, I agree with that. That director Tim Burton has always struggled with. Yeah, and I have that a lot more with Returns, but looking at this with a real critical eye, I'm interjecting, pardon me, Connor, but looking at this with a real critical eye, it still has that Returns problem to some degree of it is presenting itself too much like a traditional narrative in order to just be performance art, or I shouldn't say performance art exactly, but just film, art on film that's not telling a story in a traditional way. And again, a lot of that is because it starts with Ham as a foundation and doesn't move away enough from that to be what Burton wants it to be, I think. Which is weird, because I get the sense that they really liked each other and that he worked very closely with Ham. But, let's see, director Tim Burton has always struggled with, but, this is Connor talking, but with his first Batman, I think he gets the closest he's ever come to the latter. I agree. How successfully does he thread that needle? I've never been 100% sure. But it's nonetheless as entertaining and highly entertaining and highly quotable picture, and not the least due to Burton-ness being tempered by a studio, with this not being a household name yet. 3 out of 4. Yeah, and then the question is, was he reined in the right ways? And or was he also meddled with too much? With that third act, it's hard to say because he's so cryptic about why those things happen. Goofster123, can Mr. Mom be Batman? Of course, that was the big controversy at the time. Impossible to say, but hashtag is how underdeveloped the side characters end up. Agreed. I needed more of Billy D's Dent and Gordon, although that's with the benefit of hindsight and future films. And the Sam Hamm script did indeed have more Dent. A little more Gordon and more of an off-the-page Gordon. It clearly was what he was going for. But Dent is more involved at all in the third act in Hamm's script. And there wasn't any building to Two-Face any more than there was in this movie, but I really like that. I like the world building of that, where you can have characters that are just there. We don't even have to hint at the duality stuff yet, but you inform their character, you develop their character just enough that you can see how a character like that could maybe turn into Two-Face, because he's got that Billy D. Williams charm and that kind of stage presence, and you can see that he's trying to be so perfect, maybe he's setting himself up for failure. Jojira never got an answer to where he got those wonderful toys. Well, I guess it's just that he's rich. I don't know how he designed those wonderful toys. Matt68, very style over substance. That term has come up twice now, but that style is pretty cool. 3 out of 4. Okay, here is the new rating system for this show. It's going to sound a little cutesy, but I like it. It's what I'm going to use. So, let me start at the middle and then go kind of up and down with it. So it's going to be basically, it's going to be a 5-point scale and no point values in between. So it's not like the 0 to 4 scale where you can have 3.5s, you can have 2.5s. I'm basically just going to label with a word what category of greatness or failure or somewhere in between I think the movie is. So right in the middle is a hero, and then just above that is a superhero. I meant to make a chart for this, and I didn't get to that. Maybe I'll do that for next time. Hero, superhero, legend. So if it would get a 4 on the scripted Superhero Rewind show, it's a legend. And then under hero, when we start getting into bad territory, we have super villain, and then if I think it's just really god-awful, it's a nemesis. So the worst you can be is a nemesis, the best you can be is a legend, and I'm going to call Tim Burton's Batman a superhero. I can't call it just a hero. It is not middle of the road that way for me, and I'm, of course, still focusing more on story analysis than anything, but this rating system is a little bit less based on the literary storytelling of it as much. Like, that's still very, very important to me, but I will probably rate a little bit more personal subjective than I have in the past, and than I will when I do scripted rewind. So that'll still be the 0 to 4 scale. I'll still handle that the way I always have. But this I'm going to call a superhero on that scale. We're going to continue ranking the movies, but we're going to start over since I'm doing everything under the sun with these commentaries. So right now we have one movie, so I'm not going to make the Letterboxd list yet. I'll start that next time. We've got one, and we'll see where it falls next to, and these will be weird things to compare to each other, compared to my movie commentary for next week, which I'm going to announce straight away. Next week, I wanted to do something related somehow to Guardians of the Galaxy, since Guardians 3 comes out next week. But Austin and I on the main channel, on Geekvolution, are going to be doing a watch party for both Guardians movies, if everything goes according to plan, on Friday. So that'll be different from this. I won't prepare for that. It'll be a party before it's a formal commentary. And we're just going to watch the movies again in preparation for the new one. And so I decided I didn't want to do a Guardians commentary yet, so instead I'm going to tackle The Suicide Squad, which is shockingly already old enough to be done in Superhero Rewind. I'm cheating by a couple of months, but I am, for the commentary series, going to play by the same rules that I always have for the reviews, so the movie has to be at least 2 years old. And by the way, the Letterboxd list is for the movies that count for Superhero Rewind. The link to that is in the description if you want to take a look at that. And I'm now open for I'm now open for requests for those at the $30 tier, and also the Patreon producers will get to vote in a poll a couple times, or at least once a month, I should say, for that as well. And so you'll want to be able to see what movies are on that list, and if there's anything that you notice there that's missing that you think I should put there, let me know about it. But yeah, The Suicide Squad next time, which I've only seen once, so I've got my work cut out for me there. I'm going to have to watch that again and do a little bit of research, and I will certainly not know it anything like as well as I knew this movie. And part of the reason I wanted to start with this is because I know it like the back of my hand, and because I can't stop making commentaries about it. It's so much fun. Will this be the last commentary I ever make on Batman 89? I can almost guarantee you that it won't be. I want to say thanks to all of our patrons, and especially our Superhero Rewind producers, and as always on Superhero Rewind and on the commentaries now, I'm going to thank all of our $10 and $15 patrons by name. Once again, if you'd like to become a patron, patreon.com/geekvolution. We have tiers from $2 all the way up to $30, and from $5 up to $30, there are cool things that you can do for specifically Superhero Rewind. I want to say thanks to Bill Mills, Chewbacca's Lover, David Crabtree, Elliot Slater, Gooster123, Hayden Spring, Jeff Niederhofer, Joe Turner, Joe Gira, Jonathan Campbell, Joshua Gilisano, Matt Bat 68, Michael Martin, SS Jerry, Super Billy, Thomas Edgehill, Adam March, Checkers the Inventor, Damon Begay, Hot Soup, Jacob Schneider, Justin Hayes, Kareem Roberts, Matthew Brody, Michael Austin Gulick, Miguel Rodriguez, The Day Ghost, Unknown Passenger, Wendell Jones, and Zach. Appreciate you guys, and I appreciate everybody watching live. Bob the Hun says I missed somebody's tweet length review.
Let me go up and double check. Was it you, Bob the Hun? Oh, you know what? I might have forgotten to pull any from Patreon apart from the Discord. Let me go look at that real quick, and I'm glad I noticed that. Thanks a bunch. Everybody bear with me just a second here. Saqib Tariq, one of the most fun, rewatchable, and quotable comic book movies ever made, proved by the amount of commentaries on it on the channel alone. Rating superhero. So he agrees with me on my new rating system, and thanks a lot for participating with the new rating system. GNV Thwip. Thanks, Cap. I enjoy your show. Take care. You're a legend. Ah, that's so nice of you to say. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the show, guys. Chewbacca's Lover apparently had one that I missed, and I'm not seeing it right off, so I might have forgotten to copy it. Apologies, guys. Give me just a second here, because I don't want to shaft him, but it's not in my notes here. He says he left it on the Discord. Did you do it before we started here? Because I'm not seeing it right off. Let me see if I can pull it up real quick, guys. AMC, don't stop making these till you've made 89 commentaries of 89. A lot of people have been saying that lately. And man, there is a part of me that wants to do that. You know, I've been thinking about seeing if there's a record, if Guinness World Records keeps track of most commentaries done on a single movie, because I feel like I have a chance at doing it if they do that. And there's a part of me that hopes that it's actually, that somebody's done it and it's actually a crazy number, because I want to do it. Sorry, I'm pulling up Discord here. Apologies, I was all ready to finish up here, but I don't want to shaft Chewbacca's Lover on this. See, maybe I can pull it up on my phone a little quicker. Chewbacca's Lover, saw the ending. Yeah, he put this in during the show. So I'm gonna ask folks that are on the Discord to make sure that they go in before I start, because I don't actually pull them up on Discord. I copied them earlier, but I will go ahead and read his. Saw the ending of this movie on TV when I was 7, was blown away by how much it was like the animated series compared to Adam West, which was before the only live-action Batman I knew about. Liked how much, oh, interesting. I liked how much it was like the cartoon. Also, what are your thoughts on the idea that Batman never executes anyone, but he just sort of lets people die and engages in manslaughter? Yeah, it's kind of an easy loophole for him, isn't it? In this particular case, he is straight up killing people. I mean, the Joker has a chance to get away, and he could have let him do that, but instead, he shoots a gargoyle around his leg and makes sure that he comes down. And he doesn't try to save him this time like he did at Axis Chemicals. And that's why I say it feels like the lesson he learned was let the man die in the first place, which is kind of crazy. And then, of course, once you get to Batman Returns, he is more outright the killing people. Jareth Gearhart, are you going to watch this again before the Flash Cap? I mean, I really know this movie, and I watched it a couple more times for this review, so I probably not, but, you know, I do watch this movie quite a bit. All right, I'm going to go ahead and finish things off here. I hope you enjoyed this, guys. I will be back again next Monday. The plan is to do this every week and make it as fun and engaging and interesting as possible and get in every point I possibly can within the duration of the film. I was Captain Logan, the Suicide Squad, for next Monday. And I will see you again next time, everybody. Bye, folks.